Did Microsoft just kill Avowed 2 in favor of another Fallout game? Today we talk about the biggest announcements in the world of video games and why Xbox Game Pass might be to blame for killing your next favorite sequel. Let's go. The Game Adventure Podcast is a family-friendly show that keeps you current in the world of video games. We'll talk about current developer and tech announcements, go through the best ways to play our favorite retro games, and cover an always up-to-date wish list of games to keep an eye out for. We're doing it every week and always in under an hour, so let's go. What is up, everybody? Hope you had a fantastic week this week. This was a kind of busy one for me. I honestly didn't get to think about video games all that much until the end of the week, which honestly is kind of the point of this show because it gives us a chance to catch up on everything that happened during the week, even if we're not having time during the week to kind of keep up with it as it happens. And there are some benefits to that. It means you can be fully present in your world, doing the things that matter to you, but still kind of keeping up to date with this wonderful hobby of video games. So that's kind of the heart behind the Game Adventure. And I get to do this every week with you, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm really excited to do it some more. So without further ado, let's jump into the industry news for this week. Last week, we spent an extensive amount of time talking about whether or not Sony is the one responsible for killing physical media and this like all digital future that seems to be coming down the pipe and has for a while. So we won't really cover a whole lot more of that. There have been like some more small things that have happened this week. I think the biggest thing was the GameStop CEO saying that physical game sales were, quote, irrelevant to their business of GameStop, which I think says more about GameStop and kind of what they have become more than it says anything about whether physical media actually matters. Depending on who you talk to, a lot of people have really strong feelings about physical media continuing to be available. And there are definitely some pros to that. And others are saying, you know what, it kind of seems like a lost cause at this point. We have been shifting towards digital for years. I've contributed to that by buying as many digital copies as I have. And so the real question here that we're going to have to answer in the next, couple of years isn't really about discs. It's about ownership. It's about who owns a game. Can you own a game, or do you just kind of get a temporary license to visit the world of that video game that can be revoked at any time? So is this like a place, a game world that you own, that you get to go to anytime you want to, or is this like a rental that they can take away when they feel like it? Also, GameStop CEO calling that irrelevant is really indicative of how far GameStop has fallen from being a game store to now being a store that sells like game-related apparel and stuffed animals and tchotchkes. I really don't understand what GameStop is anymore, and I don't think they do either, to be fair. So the other big piece of news last week was the Xbox layoffs. So all of these studios, 3,200 layoffs across Xbox brands. However, this week we've heard from a couple of other people within those teams. And granted, take this with a grain of salt because this is coming from the people that stayed at those companies. So these are not the people who lost their jobs. id Software kind of pushed back against the rumors that they have been shut down basically by the number of staff that have been let go. They said they're still fine. They're still developing their next games, their technology. Double Fine and Compulsion Games were actually spun off into independent studios and even got to keep their IPs. So things like South of Midnight will continue to exist for that studio, which is great because that gives them something to stand on while they get things together to work on their next game or continue to work on that next game. Some more news came out about the studio Obsidian. Obsidian had a big release announcement of a bunch of stuff that they're working on, including some remasters of some Fallout games. However, in that news, they announced that Avowed 2, which would have been the sequel to the game Avowed, is potentially canceled. So there's some hope that there's a team that's still trying to keep the game alive. But one of the reasons it was canceled is that they wanted to move Josh Sawyer over to lead this new Fallout game. So it sounds like basically the sequel to Avowed has been kind of canceled in favor of making yet another Fallout game. So Fallout fans are very happy about that. People who played and enjoyed Avowed, not so happy about that. And so we'll dive into kind of the implications of that a little later in today's show. Another big piece of news was this account hack that happened to this poor person who had a 25-year-old Microsoft account that got hijacked, and it resulted in basically automatically being banned by Microsoft. So the account, because of the fraud on it, was permanently shut down and banned. And as a result of that, this guy lost his digital games, but also access to his OneDrive, where he had the only baby photos of his child that he had. So that was a big story. And I think Microsoft did end up restoring access to this account. He got back his photos, he got back his games. And I think this is a good example of why we shouldn't instantly rage at breaking news. Like, this might be a good example of why, hey, wait a couple of days and kind of see what happens. Like, let Microsoft respond to this. Let them have a chance to do what's right. And here they actually did decide to do what's right. Give them a chance to fix the problem. I think maybe the remaining question is, because OneDrive was sold as a product, these like cloud platforms sell us the convenience of having all of our things backed up, but also the security of having them backed up. And if they're going to be able to be, hijacked, do we just lose access to all of the stuff that we had? Is there no like solid appeals process? I mean, for this guy, he had to go viral online before Microsoft actually did something. So there's maybe something to be said there for being careful about where you keep your data. Always keep a second backup of your data. That's really important. I worked for Geek Squad for a couple of years, and I cannot tell you the number of people that came in and said, all of my photos or all of my videos or my documents, they're all on this computer and I don't have a backup. And there was no way to restore the data. And so, man, over and over again, I preached, back your stuff up. It's a cheap and easy thing to do, whether you do it via multiple cloud services or hard drives in person. Back up your data. That's really, really important. You'll sleep better at night, I promise. That pretty much does it for like the big stories in the industry this week. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the tech update. So this week in the world of technology, the Meta Quest 4 has started to be rumored. So if you are big into VR technology, if you've enjoyed the Meta Quest 3, they're looking at perhaps releasing the 4 sometime in late 2027, early 2028. So we're looking at about a year and a half out. The rumor is that they're going to make some pretty significant jumps in technology. So like 4K micro OLED screens, some other sensor capabilities that are even more advanced than what they have now. But with that comes the increase in price. And so they're likely going to bump that price up to like the $800 range. So not anything that we haven't seen already happening with consoles, current gen consoles, which is awkward. But really the news piece around this is the era of companies really subsidizing these VR sets is maybe starting to run out. So if you want to jump into VR, this might actually be a good time to do it. The Quest 3 is $499, and I think Meta actually has some fair financing plans for you to get your hands on that. So prices are going to go up in the next couple of years. This might be the time to jump if you're thinking about getting into VR. Another piece of technology that was celebrated this week is the NVIDIA RTX 5080. There's a slimline version of this that is a super thin 2-slot version of the card that's been designed for small PCs. So if you have built a PC lately, you know how important it is to have small form stuff available, because sometimes the case that you get, you just do not have the space to put in these like monster multi-slot things. So this is a 2-slot. It is definitely not cheap though. So when I saw this news story, I was like, oh, that's cool. Cause I'm always looking for updated graphics cards to kind of keep in the back of my mind, put on a wish list so that the next time I'm working on building out a computer, I have some to go to that are like, have been tested, that people seem to like. My jaw dropped when I saw this though, like retail prices $1,300 to $1,400, which is about twice the price of anything that I would be building for the whole computer. That's where I'm at. I'm kind of into building like budget builds, like how much can I squeeze out of various components, even if they're a couple of years old, to make something that functions and runs well, enough to run, emulation software, to run indie games, to run even some AAA games at lower settings. I don't demand the highest settings on those. And the one that I built was for me and my kids to play those types of games on. So I guess a good question for you is, do you have any recommendations for like budget type graphics cards that you've used and enjoyed that have worked really well for you? I would love to hear what your recommendations are on that for the next time that I'm going to build a PC, which at this point is probably a little ways out because the one I have works great. But you never know. It's kind of fun to build those things, I've gotten, I guess, more nerdy the older that I get, so that's fun. Another piece of tech is the fact that Nintendo filed this patent for a dock that would work with the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, which is super fun because right now they use the same connector. They both have a USB-C connection, but the docks are not interchangeable. So even like the third-party docks that are being made work either with the Switch 1 or with the Switch 2. They don't work both ways. And there have been some fun docks that have come out, especially for Switch 2. There's like the Piranha Plant dock that was put out. There's a GameCube one that we've talked about, PlayStation 1 and N64 style docks that are being created. So those are really neat, but really what I want and need in my living room is a dock that works for both the Switch 2 and the Switch so that I can interchangeably move those in and out of my living room. So that I can play with my family. So I think that's awesome that Nintendo is looking into that. The downside is that Nintendo usually charges, $100 plus for their dock. And I expect that would be at least that much if they were releasing an interchangeable one. But cool that they're still supporting the Switch one. So let's go ahead and jump over to the retro rerun and look at some older type games. This week in the retro news, we have two retro handhelds that are being talked about, introduced. One I actually talked about last week or the week before, I think, called the Retroid Pocket Nova. It has this beautiful 4x3 screen. It is one of the best screens that I have seen. And so if you're looking for something that is incredible just for pure pixels, this looks great. This looks like a real win. And I think it's pretty powerful under the hood too. So it will even... it's not just for those Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. It's going to run quite a bit of even more modern games via emulation. And then there's one by Ieneo, I think is how you say this company name, that is called, they're modeling it after the Game Boy Advance, which is fantastic. That's like the era of handheld that I want to introduce my youngest kids to. Because it's like easy to hold. You've got the screen in between your two hands, and so you can actually see the buttons that you're pressing, which actually is kind of a big deal for teaching them coordination between the button pressing and the screen, what's happening on the screen itself. But the name is the Konkr Pocket Advance, Konkr, which I do not understand why they named it this, but I mean, I'll just end up calling it a Game Boy anyway. I've officially reached the age where every handheld that I own, including like the AYN Thor, like things that actually have a cool name, the Thor. That's an awesome name for a handheld. But I still call that my Game Boy, and that's what my kids call it, which is funny because that's what my grandma used to call it. Like any handheld that you owned was automatically a Game Boy because that's what she was familiar with. And so you'd be like, Grandma, it's a Game Boy Advance SP. Gosh. But Grandma didn't know. I know better, and I still am just going to call it a Game Boy. So be that what it is. Another kind of cool thing that I saw in the news was the PS1. There was a game that was created for N64 that was running on the PS1. And that's kind of amazing that we've been able to, via emulation, kind of recreate these games to function on hardware that was in some ways less capable. So what's interesting about that kind of comparison is the N64 had like a ton of 3D power at the time. It could run 1 million polygons, but it was kind of bottlenecked by really expensive cartridges. So the cartridges could only hold 64 megabytes. There was a limited amount of space on those cartridges that they chose to use for the N64. The PS1, on the other hand, had less like raw 3D power, but they used 660 megabyte CDs. Like you could fit a ton of data on those CDs. And so they had cinematic cutscenes, they had like orchestral music and audio that was high quality on them. And the other big difference here is that PS1, because they chose the cheaper type of storage and they had more storage available for the game, more third-party companies created games for the PS1 than they did for the N64, even though it was technically more powerful. So like the PS1 had a library of like 1,100 plus games, over 1,000. And I think the N64 topped out at around 380 something. So like there's all these things that these companies were considering at the time. And so having the most powerful machine wasn't necessarily the thing that turned the tide in favor of developers making more games for your machine. So that's kind of an interesting thing in retrospect that we can look at. And maybe something to take note of with these companies that are trying to, you know, push their hardware to what I would call the bleeding edge. Are you considering the other things that actually are going to matter to the developers and that are going to matter to the players? Because both of those things are essential for your business. So don't forget that, Xbox and PlayStation. Another kind of cool thing was this Fable 3 is actually not considered a retro game yet. So in case you didn't know, retro is officially considered 20 years or older. So when something gets to 20 years old, it's considered retro in the game space, at least. So Fable 3 is only 15 years old. So it's not quite retro yet, but somebody has worked on a PC port of it. So the original Fable 3 was released for the Xbox 360. It looked pretty good for a 360 game. I've played it recently. It still holds up all right. Playing it on the Xbox Series S, but it's pretty cool that this PC port has basically updated all of the textures, all of the resolutions, and it really looks like the best that it possibly can for what it is. So I love that people are still going back to these games, especially games that I love like Fable. Now, granted, Fable 3 is not my favorite Fable game. I don't think it's anyone's favorite Fable game. I'd probably go with 2 myself. Loved the first one. Second one was where it was at for me. I played it multiple times. Could have just been the period of time in my life too. But 3 kind of lost me for a couple of reasons that we won't get into today. A couple other things kind of in that retro space is I usually try not to talk about like things being on sale because this isn't about buying things. This is about like video games and enjoying them. But I think it's worth mentioning the Xbox Summer Sale is live right now. And the reason I want to mention that is they have like 150 games that are on sale that are older games that are backwards compatible. Some of those actually considered retro games. So if you're looking for a really good deal on games that are still fantastic and play really well on the Xbox, you should check out the Summer Sale. See if you can't find a couple of older titles. Some of those are like less than $10. So check that out. Another like retro adjacent piece of news. If you played The Sims 4 over the last 12 years that it's been out, you've definitely had your computer crash and you've lost your progress at some point in time because they have not had autosaves on The Sims 4 until now. They finally, 12 years after the game came out, have introduced autosaves, which is wild. Good job, EA, for doing something. Better late than never, right? And then finally, 8-Bit Do is this company that makes amazing controllers and accessories. I love their products. They hold up well for a long time. They're made with quality. They're not overly expensive. And they made this really cool kind of like Game Boy style clip-on controller for your phone. So it's great for having a Game Boy with you right now. I can call my phone a Game Boy as well. Fantastic. The more things I can call a Game Boy, the better, I guess. So with that, let's jump over to today's cutscene soapbox. Today, I want to talk a little more about Avowed and why these reports that Xbox canceled Avowed 2 point to a potential flaw in the modern gaming like ecosystem. Avowed was a genuinely good game. They have thousands of user reviews on Metacritic talking about how good it actually is. And these are user reviews, not just the professional ones. It takes most people between 30 and 60 hours to play through this game for the story and the side quests, depending on how much you do. And that's a huge time investment. So according to a group called Exophase, who tracks like a subset of players through their Xbox achievements, 96% of players got all the way past the opening tutorial. So they played past what would be considered a demo of the game. 50% of them got past the first quarter of the game. So we're talking about tens of hours at this point. And 20% of players have finished the entire game. So have put in that full 40 to 60 hour range somewhere. And this represents a ton of people that historically would have bought the game, but we don't know whether they would have or wouldn't because of the current model. So historically, if a studio made a 40-hour role-playing game and it was good, people bought it. Good user reviews, people purchased it. The sales numbers were the metric that told the studio, does this make business sense to greenlight a sequel, to keep going with this? But when we look at the actual financial data for Avowed, Obsidian CEO admitted that the actual standalone copies that were sold was incredibly underwhelming. It failed to meet Xbox's raw sales expectations and reportedly bringing in around 10 million in direct sales revenue for a game that cost between 90 and 150 million dollars to make. But because it was a day one Game Pass drop, it reached over 5.9 million unique players. So that's how many people actually played it, without a fraction of those being sales. So here's the problem. Game Pass and subscription services like it, PlayStation Plus, is a fantastic value for the consumer. Now you can jump in, you can sink a ton of hours into a game like Avowed over a couple week period, beat it, and move on to the next game. But what does all that data mean for the studio? How do you measure success? Did Avowed pull in a new Game Pass subscriber? Do you know that they came to Game Pass just for Avowed? Or did existing subscribers just play it because it was free? So when the primary way that people consume your game is through a subscription service, you shut off your primary metric for deciding whether or not to continue making that type of game or sequels. And sequels are actually a really good thing when the world that's been created is good. So studios go to so much work to develop the world and the lore and the stories and the characters. And it's almost a crime to have just a single game set in a world like that. But the data is so messy that even the owners of the data, Xbox, don't seem to know what the data actually means. And that makes it impossible to clearly give the green light for our next excursion into that game world. And it makes it impossible for the development team to know where the finish line is. Like, how do you know if you did a good job when 6 million people play your game, but almost nobody bought it? So for Avowed, all hope is not lost quite yet. It sounds like there is a team of people who are dedicated to continuing the work on a sequel, in the hope that if they bring it far enough along, Xbox will fund it the rest of the way. But unfortunately, revenue will always talk louder than even the greatest game idea to a publisher. And so I would love to see a future where great games are able to prove their worth again. And that's my piece on that. Let's jump over to talk about some games that are coming out on the game list. There's a whole bunch of games on our game list this week, and we'll start with some of the AAA titles that are coming out sometime in the next month or so. Halo Campaign Evolved, obviously the big one coming out for Xbox and PlayStation on July 28th. This is a massive Unreal Engine 5 remake, completely remade. Everything looks fantastic. Every version of it that I've seen. Every part you could play for a while through the Silent Cartographer, which is that original demo that came out on the PC, the first place I experienced Halo. So I'm excited to see that game come together, and some of the levels that they've added in, I'm excited to be able to play because these kind of go into more of the lore and the story of what happened before Halo. If you've read any of the novels, you kind of know what kind of history we're talking about here. If not, you're going to enjoy these extra couple of levels. Just to note that the Game Pass release is actually a few days behind the premium pre-order release, which I think is before the 28th. Another game is Star Wars Zero Company. I had not even heard about this one until I looked at the list. I guess I just wasn't paying attention. It comes out August 27th. But this is one to keep an eye on if you like the Star Wars universe and you're looking for something that is like a tactical strategy game, kind of like XCOM. And it's set during the period of the Clone Wars. And so this one is kind of a unique take on Star Wars, honestly, that we don't see a whole lot of. So keep an eye out for that one. That's coming out end of August. And then Metal Gear Solid Collection Volume 2. This is a shout out specifically for my friend Taylor, who enjoys the Metal Gear Solid games. And this one is coming out on August 27th. And I believe it's 2 games packaged together in this one. Some subscription updates. So Xbox Game Pass is getting a couple of indies hitting this month, including Fog Piercer, which is a sci-fi train deck builder, which is a really unique, I'll give it that, pretty unique gameplay. I don't know that it's really necessarily my type of game. I like trains and I like sci-fi, but I don't like deck builders. You lost me at that one. But if you're that kind of player, you like the deck building type of games, you might enjoy this one. And it is coming to Game Pass day one. Fix Force is another one that's like a really chaotic co-op platformer. You work as robots that are trying to find the pieces in the environment to fix something. So you all get dropped into this construction site as robots. You have to go find random pieces of stuff that is going to fix the thing that's your mission to fix together. And you can even fix each other. I saw a clip where one of the robots' hats or head fell off and was like floating down the stream, and another player had to grab it and put it back on so that they could function again. So this one looks like a lot of fun. It looks like a blast if you're looking for like a co-op kind of game. Beast of the Reincarnation is about to come out, action RPG from the studio that made Pokemon. And then another one that has been getting wildly good reviews is called Dench Attack, which is really hard to describe, very Japanese in feel. It's kind of like a mixture of Tony Hawk meets Jet Set Radio, but on a train. And I don't know a better way to describe it because I think you'll just have to experience it to understand what I mean. On PlayStation Plus, we have a big update coming next week that includes Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Obviously, this game was built from the Avatar story. A lot of the gameplay, it's built by Ubisoft, and so it feels like kind of a Far Cry type exploration gameplay. I saw one of the things where the character slides under a log, and I was like, oh, that feels like Far Cry completely. Only got a 72 on Metacritic, so kind of some mixed reviews, but not all bad. Another game, Rise of the Ronin, is coming. If you haven't heard of that one, that's a big PlayStation title, is now coming to PlayStation Plus. It's like an action-adventure fighting game that's set in Japan. And then another indie game called Citizen Sleeper 2 is a strategy game. That got like a 90 on Metacritic, so that one might be worth looking into if you're a PlayStation Plus member. The Indie Minute. So the one indie game that I wanted to kind of highlight this week is a weird one called Big Walk. It comes out on August 4th. It looks very funny, very weird. Couch co-op puzzle game from the creators of Untitled Goose Game. If you ever played that really weird and oddly satisfying and fun game. It is literally walking and talking. Like they keep leaning into this. No, it really is just a big walk where you get together with a bunch of people, but the feature that they're really highlighting is the voice chat. And so if you're standing farther away from one of the other characters and you talk into your mic, it sounds like you're farther away. If you're in a tunnel, it sounds like you're in a tunnel. Like the sound is really responsive. And there's a lot of puzzles that you have to stay together to solve. And so that makes you stick together and talk to each other. And I love that this game is prioritizing cooperative gameplay. Like, you can play together in Minecraft, but sometimes when me and my kids play in Minecraft, we just kind of end up going and doing our own things. And in this one, you really have to stay together to solve the puzzles. But you also have to communicate, which I think is great. So this honestly might be one that I look at playing with my kids. So we'll see. And then one more like family game that I thought was worth mentioning is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. If you were into that in the 90s or the 2000s or today, 90s kids unite. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind is coming out on PlayStation Plus. This is an incredible, like, brand new retro arcade beat 'em up. It supports 5-player couch co-op. So if you are a family of more than 4 that needs a game to play together, this is one of those rare 5-player games. Great weekend game with the kids. It looks like it'll be a lot of fun. A game that I don't do this too very often, but just kind of issue a parental advisory warning, is the game Dispatch. So this game is a superhero comedy game. I've seen a ton of the news outlets reviewing this and talking about how great it is. But the thing that they're most excited about is the uncensored version coming to Xbox and other consoles. So this game, when it was released on the Switch, Nintendo actually censored it, if that tells you anything about the content of the game. There was content that Nintendo said, we will not allow this to be on our hardware. It is incredibly mature, but it looks kind of cartoony and it involves superheroes. And so I thought I'd just kind of lay that out there. If you're seeing lots and lots of news about this, this is not a kid's game. And if Nintendo is censoring it, it might not be a game for you either. I'm throwing it out there. Depending on what kind of stuff you're into, this might be one to avoid. So there's my rare parental advisory warning on a game. And then finally, Castlevania, Belmont's Curse. We keep seeing more of these updates on this game, and it looks like it's going to be a very like handcrafted Metroidvania style game, kind of like Symphony of the Night, if you played that one. And it's not a roguelike. So this marks kind of a departure from what has been done in the last couple of years, and maybe setting kind of a new future for Castlevania. So that is pretty much our show for this week. So if you want to keep kind of finding the good in gaming and getting it all in a nice, tight, short little package on a Saturday morning, make sure that you join our free email list. If you go over to thegameadventure.com, you can sign up for our email list. It's totally free. It's just my email list. So when you sign up, you get early access to the video edition of the podcast when that launches, probably in early August. And you'll also get an exclusive invitation later this fall to our Discord server when that comes out. So I really, really hope you have a fantastic week. Hopefully you have a time to play a couple of these games, and I will see you next week, same time, same place.